What's going on, guys? Andrew of Newbark Gaming back here, and today we've got a new game to add to our list of best anime crossovers of all time. That's going to be mixing Fire Emblem with Persona, with Harry Potter, with medieval European historical references for some reason. Regardless, this is Fire Emblem Three Houses, and this game looks pretty freaking awesome. And then today we're going to be breaking down the trailer from last week's Nintendo Direct, and it's just going to be looking to be very, very unique. So let's go ahead and start off by analyzing this analogy a little bit. Now, let's start with the Harry Potter one, because I feel like that's the one that's being slung around the internet the most right now. What brings that to people's minds? Well, you're teaching at a monastery as a professor that has literally 3 different houses. So that type of a system immediately calls Harry Potter to mind. Another one I've seen in certain comment sections, though not as frequently, probably because the fan base isn't quite as large, is comparing it to Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Now, the color schemes of the houses in this game are literally identical to that of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but they're also just primary colors, so it kind of makes sense anyway because they contrast each other well. But still, it's a working analogy at the same time. I'm going to lean more into the Harry Potter one when I'm explaining this just because I think it applies to more people. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Basically, you've got 3 different houses with animal symbols representing each of them. You've got a yellow deer, a blue lion, and a red and black eagle. Then you've got the fact that the kids are going to be sorted into these houses, studying amongst their classmates within said houses, and you get to be a professor that more or less works with one of the houses. Now, while all this isn't exactly applicable to Harry Potter, especially considering they're sorted based off geographic region in this game, as opposed to Harry Potter, you were sorted more so based off your personality and skill set, a lot of it does still apply, i.e. when you're being the professor at the academy, you get to be able to choose what it is that you're teaching for. And a lot of the professors at Hogwarts, well, while they weren't directly tied to one house and didn't teach students exclusive to that house, a lot of them sort of worked more often within a single house, i.e. Professors McGonagall and Snape, each of which were house leaders for say, Gryffindor and Slytherin, respectively. And that seems to sort of be the case here. So that's going to be a really cool mechanic in my eyes. It opens up the ability to choose, make a lot of decisions and options, which is really neat. I think it adds a lot of replay value to the game because it looks like you're going to be having unique units depending on which house you choose. So I can do one playthrough with the Black Eagles, then I can do another playthrough with the Blue Lions, then another one with the Yellow Deer, and it's all packed into one cartridge, which I think is also really, really awesome to see in action. Now, also much like Harry Potter or anything else that has this sort of sorting system within a school, it seems like there are different ideologies coming from each of them as well. So you've got the Adrestrian Empire, which is kind of this empire that's been around for over 1,000 years, kind of probably has a long dynasty, long history of the way things are done, probably a lot of respect for their ancestry and tradition. Then you've got Fergus, which is this northern thing with a monarchy going on, maybe somewhat of a similar aspect, but monarchies and empires usually are run a little bit differently. Monarchies usually have a little bit more of an advisor council involved, at least in my knowledge, which means there's probably a different approach there. Then you look at this Eastern Leicester Alliance, which is totally based on a sort of confederacy type of approach, which adds a totally different ideology as well. Once more, very similar to the Harry Potter system. You've got like the brave Gryffindors, and you've got the knowledgeable Ravenclaws, and then you've got the, more contained and a little bit more manipulative Slytherins or whatever. At least those are supposed to be the stereotypes. Obviously, not all characters fall into those perfectly, and there are a lot more subtle traits to the Harry Potter houses, etc., etc. But still, the point holds that there are kind of these divisive factors, sort of dividing each, even if they are based off geographic regions this time. And this ties pretty well into the whole European historical analogy I was making before, and I really should stop using the word European because it's more so that Mediterranean-based area, which encompasses a lot more than just Europe. Now let's go ahead and start with the Leicester Alliance, right? Well, where they're located here relative to that Mediterranean basin we have in the real life is in the east, where everything was going on. What's their government system? Well, it's based around a confederacy. What is this starting to remind me a lot of? The Persian Empire. Why? Because while they weren't directly a confederacy, they did have an overarching king who ruled over everything. At the same time, they did allow a lot of independence amongst their individual rulers, which screams to me of early confederacy, which kind of ties into this based off the geographical location and everything else. Let's go ahead and move on to the Adrestrian Empire, which has supposedly been around for over 1,000 years, right? And it's an empire. So what does that kind of ring to me? Well, it rings to me of Rome, because they're kind of in that sort of boot around the sea in this world, which kind of fits in with where Italy's located within the Mediterranean basin in the real world. Tie that into the fact of their duration. While technically Rome didn't last as an empire for over 1,000 years, if you count in the fact that Byzantium, which more or less was a conversion or an extension of the Roman Empire that continued past Rome's sack, basically, it then follows into being over 1,000 years, which ties right into this time base, as well as their governmental system working as well. Then if you move to the north, you're going to have the Kingdom of Fargus, which their geographical location reminds me a lot of France and England, right? They're also ruled by a monarchy, which works pretty well in line with what those two countries would have been at that time. They're also using a lion as their symbol, which is something that's pretty commonly used to represent England in medieval times. Going back to the whole Etruscan Empire thing, I forgot their symbol's an eagle within this monastery, which was also a symbol used very commonly by Rome. So all of this kind of ties into that, mix in the fact that you've got a monastery that's supposed to be keeping the peace, right? That rings to me a lot like what the Catholic Church was supposed to be doing during medieval times within that area. Whether they were doing it or not is a different debate for a different day, but still, that's what they claim to be doing, and all of this seems to be showing a lot of historical influence, which is something I'm kind of for. I always like it when they take inspiration from things in the real world. One of my teachers used to often tell me that the best stories of fiction are often rooted in reality, and I feel like this may actually be representing that quite well. And while we're on the subject of the whole monastery thing, this is a good time to start talking about the gameplay, which is where my comparison to Persona is going to kind of come into play, and where a lot of people seem to be drawing a little bit of controversy towards this game. Now, from what we can tell from the gameplay footage, it looks like you're going to have the ability to free roam and kind of wander within the academy outside of these battles, which is kind of a unique mechanic from at least the Fire Emblem games I'm familiar with. Most of the time within those games, you're kind of restricted to your direct gameplay and movement of characters and such being on the battlefield. Then from there, you're basically able to manage your party outside of the battlefield, and that's mostly kind of it. Now, granted, once more, I haven't played a ton of Fire Emblem games, but that is my experience with them. And so moving right along, going back to this game, it looks like you're going to be able to wander within the academy, interact with the students, choose how you want to spend time training, either with them or having them train with other people, talk with them, work on having them study certain things, etc. All this seems really cool and rings to me a lot of Persona, a game that also takes place within a school. You get to spend time studying with your friends, get to choose who you're hanging out with, get to spend time building different skills. And that's sort of what this strikes me as. Now, this kind of opens up the idea to me of, are you going to get to choose your classes for each of these students, which would be kind of a unique new mechanic, because it talks about being able to teach them horseback riding and everything else. If you're able to choose what they're studying, are you able to outright choose what class they are? Because obviously, if you're within an academy and you're trying to become a soldier, what skills you learn at said academy are going to determine what rank you are, what position you take in the field, right? So all of that would sort of make sense to me. And overall, once more, it reminds me of the slice of life mechanics of Persona. One of the reasons I really like this, if this is the case, is because one of the things that used to bug me a lot about Fire Emblem is you had a system where you could develop links and bonds between characters that would enhance their ability on the battlefield, get you some neat sequences of dialogue and those types of things. But the issue was, in order to get to that, most of the time it was, well, I've got one unit here, I need my other unit that I want to form a bond with them on the adjacent square, even though that makes literally zero sense from a strategical perspective, and we're gonna have my archer next to my lead infantry person in order to do that for some reason. Regardless, it created a lot of clunky combat a lot of times, so having those mechanics separated a little bit more, I think, is a beautiful idea. It allows you to make it so you can still be a good tactical person while also having fun developing your social bonds and building some nice tactical things there. Now, the fact that you're a teacher within this game, I think, is really cool. I think it makes a lot of sense for the game, because a lot of times in the past, at least with the Fire Emblem games I've played, the way in which they've integrated a character that's representative of you has often been somewhat clunky and feeling out of place within the world. Now, why do I say that? Well, for example, the GBA game one that I've been playing, which is something with a sword in it, that's been sort of frustrating me in terms of how they integrate you, is you're supposed to be this tactician that's never on the field with your units, and for all intents and purposes, the lines of dialogue that you have with people don't resemble that of a general at all. Instead, it's going to be your lord character class that kind of has those general type conversations. So everything about it just feels very, very clunky to me, versus having you as a professor that can walk around, that can teach lessons, that can interact with your students. It just fits this role really well. I think it was a very clever idea for them, and once more, the idea that you can choose your house each time broadens that perspective of gameplay a lot, adds a lot of replay value to the game as a whole. Now, while we're on the subject of this, let's go ahead and roll into the plot a little bit. Now, theoretically, there are these three factions lying within a continent that are supposed to be relatively at peace with one another. Well, we get a cutscene towards the end of this trailer that seems to show them getting ready to attack one another. You see each faction kind of having their leader from within the academy, gathering its forces and then charging into battle. Now, since each faction is focused on individually, we can't necessarily tell for certain who it is that they're charging against, but a different perspective is shown for each of the factions, which would sort of form this, like, almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Three lines that intersect at one another in the middle type of a formation, which would imply to me that maybe they are charging against each other. That would sort of make sense for a plot of this game, because it seems to be hinting at the fact that, well, these were once at war, now they're not at war, now you're teaching at this academy which is supposed to be keeping them at peace. That to me just rings, these aren't going to be at peace for long type of a thing. We also are aware that your character's father dies within the beginnings of this game. Now, this is nothing unusual for Fire Emblem, at all. As many people have often said, the Fire Emblem creators hate watching parents live as much as Disney movies often do. So with that being the case, it's nothing new there. What I would take from this plot is it's probably pretty likely that your character may have the motivation to look for who killed the parents if we don't already know that. So at which rate, maybe what we find out is it's this sort of mysterious force puppeteering things in the background to get the factions to fight with one another. That way they can tear down the government or something along those lines being their motivation. That seems to me to be the way the plot is striking. We also see towards the end of the trailer your character sort of being shrouded in this darkness type of thing. That to me I could see as being our catalyst that causes the basically clash between the three different factions, and basically your job from within the school is to try and reunite the factions in order to have them unite to face this bigger opponent that's causing all of their troubles to begin with. Now, is that definitely the way it's going? Well, no, but it's definitely one way I could see it going, and we'll just have to wait and see on the plot. For the most part, at least when I play a Fire Emblem game, I don't really play it for the plot. I'm not so much concerned with that. I play it more so for the gameplay, the strategy involved, and some of the character interactions, and this game seems to be ramping those up a lot, which I think, as always, is really awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about that gameplay, right? Obviously, it's a Fire Emblem game, so essentially what you've got is a super complicated chessboard with some RPG elements on each of those characters to upgrade their skills and whatnot. You're moving them through this tile-based board system, setting them up to attack opponents best, all of that type of grand stuff. Now, one thing that really stood out to me about this trailer in terms of that part of the gameplay is it looks like we're not really going to be having load screens in terms of the battle animations. We're just going to be jumping right into it, which is one thing that I always really enjoyed about the GBA games as opposed to, say, the GameCube games, which, if you've ever played the GameCube Fire Emblem game, dang, that thing has some terrible load times. Like, it's, okay, we're attacking, skip to a load screen, go into the battle scene, skip back to a load screen, and it's not a fun time. So having this smooth transition is awesome, and the fact that these graphics look as good as they do while maintaining that is also awesome. Another really cool thing about the battle animations in this game, unlike previous games, at least the ones I've played, is the fact that you have background troops standing in the background sort of cheering you on, or fighting one another, or whatever, which makes it feel a lot more like this grand scale of a battle. Versus in previous games, it's like, well, I've got my 12 units on this side, and they've got their 20 units on the other side, and we're going to make them fight. Well, that's not very representative of a war. It's very rare that you have a war fought with under 50 people on each side, which is really, really cool to see. It shows the fact that they're trying to get at this grand scale thing. It makes me almost wonder if within the game, perhaps you have units rather than just individual soldiers that you're controlling, right? That could be really awesome as well. Now let's finally jump back to the one thing that I sort of haven't covered yet in this trailer breakdown. That's going to be the character of Sothis. Now she's this character that apparently only you can see and that starts to appear in your mind. I'm wondering what exactly her character's role is, so we're going to spend a little time speculating on that, and that's why I sort of saved it to the end. Now, I've already revealed to you guys what I think the plot may be of this game, which is you have this greater evil force that causes the three factions to then clash with each other. Then you have to reunite them from within the school in order to battle the bigger evil force, right? I'm wondering if Sothis was sort of the first person that tried to stop this evil force, and then she was killed or something like that, and she's trying to guide your character in the best possible route to try and unite the various factions. Maybe she's trying to draw your attention to certain details, make it more obvious to you. It would strike to me that if maybe she's dead, perhaps she's, or not dead, maybe if she's only appearing to you, then perhaps she's dead and she's a spirit that only you can see. Maybe you're sort of a chosen one of sorts in order to basically carry out protecting the peace. Now, some other possible interpretations is maybe she's just a guide or a tutorial tool. I feel like that's most likely not the case given how much emphasis she's kind of given in this trailer. I think she's one of the most interesting toss-ups in terms of the story that we've seen. And once more, I don't usually play Fire Emblem for the story, so if there's any kind of intrigue at all, I see that as a plus, and I definitely see Sothis so far as a plus. So with all that being said, guys, it's going to about wrap up my thoughts on this trailer. I think this great game looks absolutely great. Definitely going to be something I'm picking up. It's coming out in the summertime, which oftentimes doesn't have a ton of huge releases for games anyway, so this spicing that up is always a good thing. As per usual, be sure to let me know your thoughts, comments, theories, etc. in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and I'll catch you guys next time with some more video game trailer breakdowns.